Hi everyone, I'm back today to read chapter 2 of The Littles, and I have someone different to help me read it today. It's our friend Rashid. I know some of you were worried about him on Thursday when we left school, so I brought him home with me so that he wouldn't be lonely and so that you wouldn't have to worry about if he was safe or not. Yesterday, you'll remember we talked about making a movie in our head, picturing what was happening to help us understand the story. I was happy to hear from some of your families telling me that you did that while I was reading it, and I was even happier to hear that some of you started reading those chapter books that you took home last week, and you were working on doing the same thing with those. Let's get back to our book and chapter 2 of The Littles. One day in May, the Littles were together in their living room. The two children, Tom, 10 years old, and Lucy, 8, were on the sofa next to their mother. Granny Little sat in her rocking chair, knitting a red sweater for Tom. "Don't know why Henry Big made such a fuss when we took his old red socks," she said. "One of them had a real bad hole in the toe." Uncle Pete, holding his cane, leaned against the fireplace. "You have enough red yarn there, Granny," he said, "to start a whole knitting factory." Mr. Little was walking back and forth. "Please sit down, Will," said Mrs. Little. "You're making me nervous." "Now, there's no reason for us to be worried," said Mr. Little. "The Bigs have gone on vacation before." "But never for 3 months," said Mrs. Little. "And what about this new family?" said Uncle Pete. "The Newcombs." He shook his cane in the air. "We don't even know them." "We don't have to, Uncle Pete. I keep telling you that," said Mr. Little. "If they're good enough for the Bigs, they're good enough for the Littles. Besides, they'll only be here for 3 months. We can stand anything for 3 months. "Why do they want to rent the house for only 3 months?" said Tom. "Isn't that kind of silly?" "The Newcombs are from the city," said Mr. Little. "Sometimes people rent houses in the country while the owners are away on vacation. It's like a vacation for city people to live in the country for a while," said Mrs. Little. "I don't like it," said Uncle Pete. "Suppose they bring a cat with them." Lucy Little moved closer to her mother. "Oh, Mother, suppose they bring a cat with them." Mrs. Little put her arm around her daughter. Granny Little stopped rocking. "Did he say they have a cat?" She nodded toward Uncle Pete. No, said Mr. Little. "He said suppose they had a cat." "Oh," said Granny Little. She started rocking again. "I hope they don't bring a cat." Who's afraid of an old cat?" said Tom. "I wish everybody would stop talking about cats," said Lucy. "I'm afraid of cats." She looked from person to person. "Please, let's stop talking about cats." I hope you were working on picturing what was happening in your head. There was one picture that showed Granny Little sitting in her rocking chair knitting. You can see in her hands, she's holding some pins to use for knitting needles. I pulled out from my sewing box a couple of pins so you could see how big they are. And I also have some knitting needles. I try to knit, but I'm not very good at it. And here are my knitting needles. Look how big they are compared to me. And then look at the size of the knitting needles Granny was using, so you can get an idea of how small she was. Here's a ball of yarn that I found with my knitting needles, so you can see the size of that. I notice in the picture that Granny is using a spool of thread for a table and a bottle cap for a ball that she has her yarn in. So I got out a spool of thread. You can see how big it is compared to me. And a bottle cap. You're probably sure about the size of that, and you know how small that is. So look at the size of it compared to her. So hopefully that will help you picture in your head how big the littles are and give you an idea of what's going on with them. I heard somebody was looking for some littles in their house. I don't know if we have any in our house. If we do, I hope they take care of repairs. If not, I've got our good friend Rashid here to help me out. We'll be back tomorrow for chapter 3. See you then.